This is Boston University's Neurophotonics Center podcast. My name is Sung An, a third-year PhD candidate in biomedical engineering, and I am the producer and editor of this episode of the podcast. This episode, we are joined by Dr. Jonathan Pillow from the Princeton Neuroscience Institute as he talks about his serendipitous journey into neuroscience from being a math and philosophy major, and shares with us his enthusiasm about his research into neural coding. He also shares valuable advice about professional development in science. That said, thank you for tuning in, and please enjoy the episode.
Hi, welcome to Neurophotonics podcast episode 3, season 2. I am Sudan Dewadi. I am fourth year biomedical engineering student and also Neurophotonics trainee. And we have our co-host.
Hi, I'm Dora. I'm also a fourth year biomedical engineering PhD student, and I'm also a trainee at the Neurophotonics Center. Today we're interviewing Dr. Jonathan Pillow. Dr. Pillow is a professor at the Princeton Neuroscience Institute. He's a leading figure in computational and theoretical neuroscience, known for developing powerful statistical and machine learning frameworks to understand how neural populations encode and process information. His work has really shaped how we think about neural coding, latent variable models, and inference in large-scale neural data sets. Dr. Pillow, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's nice to be here.
Yeah, happy to have you here. Hope you have been having a great time at the Neurophotonics Center. You had a workshop yesterday. If you wouldn't mind just giving us a quick introduction of how that went before we dive into more deeper into your career and.
Okay, great. Well, it was really an honor to be invited. I guess they have an annual workshop, methods workshop at the Neurophotonics Center, and they invited me to give a 4-hour workshop, which I have to say is longer than I've ever spoken at once before. So it was about 15, 20 students and me, and we the goal of the workshop was to talk about a class of models called latent variable models it's a powerful statistical approach for trying to extract hidden structure from neural data sets. So we kind of started, I tried to make it interactive. We should really ask the students how it went, kind of starting from the very basics of what is a latent variable model, how do we fit those models to data, what are some of the classes of latent variable models we might be interested in, and it was really fun. The students asked lots of questions. Yeah, I had a great time. I think we were all a bit shattered by the end of it, but we should find out from them what they thought. But it was a relief that they also participated a lot. In the philosophy of education, I've read that if you can retain information better if you have to produce it yourself rather than just passively receiving it. So I try to sprinkle in some quiz questions. So just if you understood the last part, let's see if you really understood it. And I'll ask you a few questions to use that knowledge to see if you can put it forth in a way that's applies to a new question, for example.
Awesome.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for coming here and doing the workshop for the students. And of course, hands-on experience matters more than just theoretical reading. So diving a little bit into your background and your scientific journey, we know that you studied math and philosophy at the University of Arizona, right? And later you switched to neuroscience for grad school. So how did that shift happen? What was the thought process there? Were you introduced to some neuroscience research in your undergrad, or was it a post-bac thing? How did that happen?
It was actually my final year of university as an undergraduate. So I was starting my senior year, I was a double major in math and philosophy, and I liked philosophy. I was interested in the philosophy of mind in particular. I also thought math was really great, and I think early I might have thought about being a mathematician, but I realized after some summer research that I liked math, but I didn't think sort of pure math research was so abstract, and I think I wanted to work on something that was a little bit more applied. So I started my senior year of college not really knowing what I wanted to do, and someone said, there's actually a new professor over in the psychology department who uses math to study the brain. You should maybe go talk to him. His name was Rich Zemmel. He was a first-year assistant professor. And I said, that sounds really fun. I'll go give that a shot, because I had to do a senior thesis to graduate with honors. So I went and met with Dr. Zemmel, and he gave me he said, yeah, I think you have the right background to do this research. And so he gave me a few papers to read, and I took those papers away, and I could not understand them. So there was stuff that now I think I should have had enough math to understand them, but for whatever reason, they were Poisson population codes. So Rich had worked with Terry Sinowski for his postdoc. So you're coming out of the neural coding literature. And I also had been meeting with a philosophy professor to talk about maybe doing a philosophy senior thesis. And so I decided, actually, no, this math stuff is too hard. I'm going to go, and to this day, I'm grateful that I didn't just send an email saying, sorry, I can't make it to our next meeting. I showed up and I was there to just have a 5-minute meeting and say, thanks, but no thanks. I don't think this is really the right fit for me. And I kind of said that, look, I tried to read these papers and I really didn't understand them. So thank you for your time, but I don't really think it's going to be a good fit. And he talked me down and he said, oh, actually, no, I wasn't intending for you to understand everything in those papers. I just wanted to give you a flavor of the kind of things we work on. I actually think you have a good background to do this work. And I said, really? And so completely right at that moment, I did a 180. I think, we look at like how, strokes of luck kind of influence our trajectory right there. So then I ended up doing my senior thesis with Dr. Zemmel, and he was the one who suggested which graduate programs I might want to apply to. So I applied to a variety of PhD programs, some in applied math with applied mathematicians studying the brain, or a neuroscientist with a mathematical flavor to their research. And I ended up finding a really good fit at NYU. But that was kind of the pivotal moment where I pivoted from being kind of someone who's really interested in math and dabbles in philosophy a little bit to thinking I want to use math to study the brain. But it could have easily gone a different way. I feel like if I just ghosted him and not showed up for the meeting or sent an email, who knows what would have happened.
That's amazing. I think Sung had similar story as well. Sung was undergrad in math, right?
Yeah,
and then
I was also a theoretical mathematician.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is I used to disdain anything that was math, applied math. I thought was sort of hideous. Like pure math was the best. It had no application at all. That was what I did a lot of number theory, but not that what I do now has. It's far from having direct clinical application. I wouldn't claim that anything we're doing is directly helping people. Whenever you're on a plane and they say, is there a doctor? I'm always sort of ashamed to think, well, I'm not the kind of doctor that would ever help anyone.
Doctor in philosophy comes back.
That's right. But at the same time, it is, at this point, in my career, I feel, I love using math to solve, real world problems. And so that is something I find very satisfying.
Yeah, absolutely. Very inspiring for our viewers as well. If you're an undergrad or early career scientist, you can always switch back and forth and explore your other interests, and who knows what happens.
Yeah, I'll just say one thing that I love about neuroscience is that it actually is a very cross-disciplinary field. I mean, it's not that old as a discipline, but I came from math, but other people come from engineering or linguistics or psychology or computer science, statistics, physics, statistical physics. So there's all these different kind of theoretical tools. Sometimes it's challenging to understand. I'll read a paper written by a physicist, and they talk about some of the same concepts, but they use different words for it, or they use a different letter when they write the equation for entropy, or they use S, we use H, as statisticians. So sometimes it's a little bit hard to communicate across those disciplinary boundaries. But at the same time, I think it enriches the field because there are different approaches and different motivations to study the same problem. So I've learned a lot since joining the field from people outside of who came from a different background from me.
Absolutely.
So in terms of what ended up being your senior thesis to going into grad school, how similar was your senior thesis compared to what you ended up doing in grad school? Or did you go and taste a little bit of everything in terms of like the neuroscience world of like when you got into grad school before deciding that you do want to do statistical approaches? Yeah,
so great question. I think in many ways my thesis research, I went to NYU for my PhD, ended up being pretty similar to what I did as an undergrad. I would say the main difference would be my undergrad work was more, maybe you would say, theoretical neuroscience. It was sort of from a normative standpoint. And so this is maybe one of the key distinctions I think in the field is normative work is asking, without starting from the brain, just asking, here's this problem the brain wants to solve. It wants to take in some kind of information and make a decision optimally. How would you go about solving that problem in an optimal way? And you derive that and then you check belatedly, does it match what brains actually do? So that's the normative approach. The other approach is what we often call the descriptive approach. You start with some neural data, and then you build models to try to describe that data. And then belatedly, you could ask, is that normatively optimal in some way? Is the way that the brain solves the problem of when to make a decision, let's say, does that optimize some normative objective? But so these are kind of two slightly different approaches. So I would say my undergraduate work was more on the normative side of like, start playing with this model of cross-on neurons with tuning curves and some recurrent connectivity. I think the problem I worked on was, can we get them to represent two orientations or two stimulus values simultaneously? Often you think of a population code in V1 as being, there's a single orientation and that's what it's representing. But what if there are two orientations present? Could you decode two orientations from one V1 population code? So that was sort of a question motivated purely from a theoretical standpoint. And then belatedly, you could ask, does this look anything like how the brain works? And so my PhD work was more starting from data. I ended up collaborating with E.J. Cholnitsky, who's now at Stanford University, on modeling spike trains. So there it was much more data-driven approach to studying the brain. But before I did that, I should say, in my PhD program at NYU, and I think many programs, I'm not sure here at BU, during the first year you do research rotations. So you don't just join a lab right away, you start, and at NYU they encouraged me to do experimental rotations in particular, knowing that I would go on to be computational neuroscience. Well, no guarantee, but they wanted everyone to at least get a taste of doing experimental work. So I did one rotation in psychophysics. So I had people looking at illusory contours and pressing buttons, and that was fun. And we actually ended up writing a paper out of that. That was with Nava Rubin. And then I did a rotation in slice physiology. So I was taking rat brains, and you slice them very thinly, and then you get a glass pipette, and you have to suction onto a single neuron and break in and record neurons, which was something I'd never done before. And it was very daunting. And I do remember the first time I finally broke into a cell, and it was sort of like this wow, so you could hear the spikes coming out, and I thought that was so exciting. I said, okay, so what do we do next? And the grad student I was working with said, well, you come back tomorrow and you do the same thing. And you come back tomorrow and you do, and I realized then, okay, for me, it was like, as a mathematician, this is an existence proof that I can get data, but I don't need to get more data now. That was enough of it. I saw that it is possible to get data, but that wasn't really what drove me. And I enjoyed much more working with data. But I've seen it go the other way too. I know people who intended to be, I think Nicholas Preby was my colleague at UT Austin. He started out as intending to be a computational person, but then he started doing experiments and he found that he just loved collecting data and loved thinking about new ways to design new experiments. And I think Misha Ahrens is another person who was at Gatsby with me, started as a computational person, but found he loved designing experiments and recording from brains. So I think it can go either way. Some people find that one aspect of the field is more appealing to them than the other. And so yeah, for me at least, I always knew that I probably wanted to do computational work, but that certainly confirmed it, that it was nice to have the experience of collecting data, but I didn't need to. It wasn't my calling really to do that.
Yeah, I mean, my story looking back is also going from like different paths. I thought I would be doing either genetic engineering or stem cell research, but the first research lab I joined, they were also doing wet lab physiology. You might know Dan Sins from New York University. So my advisor was advised by Dan Sins as a postdoc advisor. And then Todd Mowry, who was also in Dan Sins' lab. So both of those research advisors were heavily in wet lab stuff, but there was also computational engineering, electrical, and data analysis arc. So I started out with the wet lab and slowly gravitated towards the computational and more engineering side.
And you're more purely computational now?
No, I do collect the data myself on humans using this cap, actually, Effner's cap. And then, so that's probably 5 to 10%, but most of the time I'm just in my computer, 90% of the time analyzing data or I'm building some models. That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add on to that I also had a background where it was very computational heavy, but because of the reasons that, we didn't have the resources to have a wet lab. So when I came to BU, I was very happy to finally be in a lab, to finally see a mouse and hold a mouse and put it underneath a microscope. However, when I started out with experimental neuroscience, just the fact like building the hardware component of my experiments, especially because I was at some point doing visual stimulus experiments and like those things were not working out as I wanted them. That's when I decided that I do want to transition back into doing computational stuff. That's something.
I'm in awe of what people go through to design experiments, build the rig, calibrate the microscope. It's a massive. So I feel very lucky that there are people who like to do that because the data that they collect ends up being.
It's very tangible. It's like you do something with your hands. So in that sense, it's very fulfilling work. But yeah, I mean, maybe just not for us. Could we do a little bit like a quick overview of like how your postdoc shaped your experience into like becoming faculty member and like what does your lab look like now? Like what are the components that you took from like all your previous education experience and implemented it into the lab that you're leading now?
Okay. So my PhD was at NYU with Eero Simoncelli, and so he runs the Lab for Computational Vision. And his lab is actually heavily focused on, I think half of it is more on the machine learning side of things, understanding how we see, and both computer algorithms for vision as well as biological vision. And I was more on the biological side. So I was studying retinal processing of information in the retina. So our collaborators would record spike trains from multiple neurons in the retina, and you'd get out, a collection of 50 neurons or so, or 25 neurons, spike trains while a movie was playing. And so you can think of this as often called the neural coding problem. In came a movie, light varying over time. Out came some spikes. So arrivals of these individual events from multiple different types of neurons. And so what is that form of that encoding? So my PhD work was designing statistical models to understand what information is extracted, and then how do those retinal neurons work together to convey information. And so then I went to London for a postdoc. I did a 3-year postdoc at the Gatsby Computational Neuroscience Unit, where I worked a bit with Peter Dayan and with Peter Latham. And I learned an incredible amount, actually. So it was fun being in a place that there were 4 PIs and about 10 postdocs and maybe 15 or so PhD students, but everyone there was computational. And so, and many of them were doing pure machine learning research as well. So I think it really opened my eyes to a much broader range of machine learning ideas. And so then after that, so I should say one unique thing about the Gatsby is you're only allowed to stay for 3 years for a postdoc. So you're cut off, which I think in the US, at least, it's very common for people to do 4 or 5. Yeah. If you're an experimentalist, it could be 7 or 8 year postdoc. And it's something that's crept up over time. I think there's concern, of course, about scientific careers and how long it takes to get your first faculty position. But I was maybe I benefited from the fact that after 3 years, I knew I had to get something else. And so it was actually quite a stressful time. I was applying for faculty positions, but I wasn't at all sure that I would get something. So I'd actually reached out to a few people about a second postdoc as a backup option. But I was lucky to get an offer at UT Austin in the psychology department. They had a unit called the Center for Perceptual Systems, which was led by Bill Geisler, and they had a great group of people who were doing systems neuroscience with a main focus on sensory perception. And so it was really a nice fit for me to go there. And I started collaborating with Alex Huck when I got there, and his lab focused on decision making. And so in some ways, I would say when I started my own group, I pivoted away from vision a bit more towards decision making, which is maybe more of a focus of my group now. So as an animal gets a sensory stimulus, instead of just focusing on the neurons that encode purely the sensory stimulus, now we're looking at how an animal integrates that information across time and uses it to make a decision. So there's this paradigm of it's often called sensory decision making or integration of evidence, where the one I like to think about is when I cross the street, you're standing there and you're watching some car approaching, and you're trying to figure out how fast it's going and deciding, should I cross the street or not? And so you have to make that decision in a finite amount of time. If you wait too long, well, by then surely it's too late to start crossing the street. But the longer you watch it, the better an estimate you get of how fast it's moving. But so there's this kind of critical sensory integration period versus just time to act. And if I don't optimize that, I can make the wrong decision. And so sometimes you do make the wrong decision. You thought it was moving faster than it was. You think, I don't have time to cross now. By the time you realize it was moving slower, by now it's too late. But so we face those kinds of decisions all the time. Or how if you catch up, baseball, you're estimating the trajectory, your visual system's getting light over time on your retina, and you have to figure out, where do I move my hand to catch that baseball? So Alex Huck's lab recorded in prefrontal cortex and frontal eye fields in some of the areas of the brain that are involved in decision making and cognitive neuroscience. And so since being at UT Austin, I think my lab is focused more on statistical models of those brain areas and what kind of information is represented. There you have a mixture of sensory information and motor preparatory information. So if the animal's an organism's preparing to act, what are those signals and how are they distinct from maybe the decision that was made? And so I was at UT Austin for 5 years. And then in 2014, I moved to Princeton University, where I am now. And so that I had an opening in the Princeton Neuroscience Institute, which is a department that kind of combines. Originally, the members were drawn from the psychology department and the molecular biology department. So people studying more circuit level neuroscience on the one hand, and people studying human and cognitive neuroscience on the other hand, all came together into one building. And they had a few openings that they wanted to fill specifically with computational neuroscientists. And so I was the first kind of purely computational hire that they had there. And it's been a really great fit. The department itself is very heavily, I think, leans towards computational approaches. So there's a lot of experimental groups that really want to embed computational work into their workflow, and so to collaborate with me. And so it's been fun. I feel like I collaborate with half the department or so in terms of people on different brain areas. So I have some colleagues who work in C. elegans, in the worm, flies, mice, rats, primates and humans, fMRI data as well. So kind of across the spectrum, there are different interesting problems to think about it. So it's been really fun to tackle those problems and to collaborate with those people.
Wow, that's amazing. So first of all, bringing molecular and then psychologists or cognitive researchers in the same building, amazing. And then now you have all skills of animals and research. That's amazing.
So you mentioned that the Neuroscience Institute brought together all of these different scientists with different types of backgrounds. What has your experience been being in such an interdisciplinary surrounding, and how have you adapted throughout the time in terms of how you communicate with scientists of certain backgrounds? Because you did mention before that people use different types of phrases, different types of notation for their mathematical equations. So how has that experience been for you?
Well, it's true that we also have a very strong physics group there in Princeton. So Bill Bialik is a sort of National Academy member who's very well known for his work on information theory and maximum entropy style approaches for modeling the brain. So I've learned a lot from him and from his group. I would say on the neuroscience side, I've learned. So I work with Andy Leifer, who works in C. elegans, and so we have in fact, one of the fun things is I've had a lot of shared. Half of my students or so are co-advised. So they're co-advised by me and by an experimentalist, and so they've come from Andy Leifer's group, who works in C. elegans, Mala Murthy, who works in fly and Drosophila, Ilana Witten and Carlos Brody, who both work with rodents. And then I've collaborated also with people, several of the people who work on fMRI data and decision-making in humans, and Tim Bushman as well, who works in both rodents and in primates. So I would say it's certainly eye-opening. And so one of the new directions, I guess, would be connectomics. So the C. elegans is the first organism where we had a full connectome, but learning from Andy a bit about kind of the way, what's known about the worm and how these experiments are done. And the neurons in C. elegans are mostly not spiking, so they're analog neurons. The recording technology is really amazing for how Andy's lab can visualize all 150 or so neurons in a worm's head while it moves around on a dish. They've got this motorized stage where they move the stage to keep the head right underneath the microscope objective. But there's a whole worm community, which I'm not, I didn't know anything about before starting to collaborate with Andy. And so I do often feel like I have to stop and ask very basic questions. Wait, what is that? What is that tool? I haven't heard of that before. And so then also working with, some connectomic data from Mala Murthy's group. And so learning also about the kinds of tools that they have available. So it's fun in invertebrates, at least, there are a lot of, powerful tools. Oh, we can knock out that neuron. Just tell me what you want to do. We have, we can breed a mutant lion that would knock out this class of neurons, or would allow us to visualize. So the flexibility for invertebrate research is really impressive. And so it's been fun to work with those labs where the turnaround time to designing a new experiment is also very, very rapid. But and I have a new shared student with Fenna Creenan, who works in single cell RNA sequencing, and so that the world of molecular neuroscience and genomics is entirely new to me. So I'm still, I guess, trying to learn the conceptual lay of the land for genomics research. But I think there's a lot of exciting opportunities for combining gene expression data with neural activity and kind of trying to understand the relationship between those two. So I feel like I'm always learning from my colleagues and from my students as well. And so that's one of the things I love most about my job.
That's amazing. We have similar experience at BU as well. So we all are co-advised.
Oh, you are? It's part of is that part of the requirement of the program, or
no, it just happened to be so. Like BU is the whole point of the Neurophotonics Center is also like all of the professors from biology, neuroscience, engineering, that, electrical engineering, all come together. So even the Neurophotonics trainee are like you saw yesterday. They were all from different disciplines.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So both of my advisors were trained physicists, and then they one branched out to auditory neuroscience, another branch out to optics and optical measurement tools and stuff. And and we also, the worm poking reminds us of our first year Neurophotonics Center trainee program.
Did you do some elegans experiments?
Well, they took us to the Met campus to look at some worms,
Yeah, we poked some worms using our eyelashes or something. It was really cool to see them under the microscope, how they move and everything. It was a similar experience. They were like, just tell me we can knock out this neuron, that neuron. Right, yeah. We can image the whole brain, and it's just 300 neurons.
And yet we still don't know how it works. So that is the scary part.
They're still studying, which is really cool.
So we wanted to transition into a little bit scientific themes and big ideas that you are currently working on. Could you give us a little bit of an insight into what your lab is currently focused on, or what is something that is really exciting to you at the moment?
Sure. Yeah. So one, I would say Connectomics is kind of an exciting new direction. So my colleagues Mala Murthy and Sebastian Sung just led a consortium that mapped the entire connectome in Drosophila. So there was a batch of papers about the fly connectome. And so I guess maybe a general theme of my research is sort of taking methods, advanced methods from machine learning. So methods for inferring, modeling functional connectivity, for example, or modeling time series data. And often they have generic, I guess in the machine learning world, they might have generic priors, like something that enforces smoothness, or sparsity is another common theme. But so I think it's exciting to try to think about incorporating prior information that we have from biology. So in other words, if we know about, one example is Dale's law. Right? So the classic recurrent neural networks with random weights don't typically obey Dale's law, but we know neurons typically, Dale's law is the property that neurons mostly only make excitatory or inhibitory connections. So H neurons' outgoing weights have to be either all positive or all negative. And so that's a form of information that we know about how the brain works, which is, that, and I should say, I'm not even sure if that's true in C. elegans. It may be that there are some neurons that release more than one neurotransmitter, or that neurotransmitter may be excitatory in some neurons and inhibitory in others. So even that is something that's up to be determined in different biological settings as to how strong that is. But when we have information about specific cell classes that project to others, so I get the talk that I'm going to give later today, we'll talk about how to build models of latent dynamics underlying high-dimensional neural population activity that take into account constraints on cell types. So we know certain cell types have maybe certain projection patterns, or they have certain sign of they're either inhibitory or excitatory. How do we start to take the information from biology and use it to constrain models? So these models, there's many free parameters, and we have a limited amount of data. But if we know something about about the biology, we can use that to make much better models from less data. So that's and I think also combining, using the connectome to figure out what to constrain our models of what's being computed in different brain areas is something that's also very exciting. So that's one, is maybe integrating the connectome with functional models of the brain. Another area that's I'm very excited about, I'm actually hoping to talk about this a little bit today during my talk, is learning. So this is something that strikes close to home, is that I'm at the Princeton Neuroscience Institute, and so one of our strengths is in reinforcement learning. So reinforcement learning is the study of how animals learn from experience. How do you learn from reward? If I reward certain actions and not others, you'll adapt your behavior through time. And the general theoretical discipline for this is often called reinforcement learning. And so there are people in my building who study reinforcement learning, and they mostly work on humans and how humans will learn to do. If I give you a task where you have to push one lever or the other, and this one pays off 80% of the time, and this one pays off 20% of the time, you'll learn to pull this lever. And then if over time this lever stops paying off quite so well, you'll develop some exploration policy to learn the reward structure of your environment. But in the same building, we have people who train animals to perform a task. So in a lot of neuroscience experiments, we need an animal to wait for a light to go on before it pushes a lever, or it has some clicks that come out and it has to decide which microphone has clicks that are coming out faster. And so the animals are learning from scratch. They're learning to perform a new behavior, learn a new task. But how do we train those animals? We don't use any reinforcement learning to do that. The training is entirely by grad student descent. I mean, the grad student tries training the animal, and it often is a very lengthy process to figure out, I start by only showing them the tones, or I start by only teaching them that they need to press this lever, or they need to lick into this port. And then once they've learned that, then I'll slowly introduce the stimulus. I'll start by giving them easy trials only on one, whatever. There's some protocol for shaping the animal's behavior through time. And I guess I perceive there's a disconnect between the people on the one hand studying learning, how do animals learn, and the people actually trying to train animals. And so that, this was about 5 or 6 years ago. I was sitting in a talk from one of Carlos Brody's students who said that to train their rats in the task, it took 5 months to train an animal to learn to discriminate two tones. And I thought, wow, 5 months, that's crazy. How can it be that learning is that slow? Surely with machine learning, we could do better. It was sort of my first naive thought. Isn't there some way we could speed up learning in animals? And so that kind of led to Ji-Hun Bak was my PhD student at the time, who really seized that idea and came up with an idea for how to, first of all, fit a reinforcement learning model. How is it that the animal on every trial, it got rewarded or didn't? And it adjusts its policy just a little bit. So there's a method in reinforcement learning called policy gradient methods, which is I have a current policy and I'm going to compute the derivative of that policy with respect to the reward that I'm getting. So in other words, I want to adjust my policy through time to get more rewards. And I should say in reinforcement learning, we often, so she fit that model to the animal's behavior and then was able to see, well, what is it that drives learning? How are they learning from over time from this task? And then she asked, could we design a better curriculum? Could we train animals faster by choosing how much reward to give or when to give the reward or which stimuli to show? Should I show you an easy trial next or should I show you a hard trial? We think about this when we're learning calculus. You start with a hard example, we have some idea of how you should teach people. Start with algebra, then teach them pre-calculus, then teach them trigonometry, et cetera. Why is that the optimal path to learn something? So my research is pretty far away from human curriculum learning, but can we design curricula for teaching animals to learn to perform these tasks better? And so we both, the hope would be that we can both learn something about how animals learn in realistic settings, and then also design new methods for training them to do the kinds of tasks we want to learn. So that's, I should say, Jihan. She developed an algorithm for training rats, and she did that on simulated rats, and so that she can train simulated rats much faster using her curriculum. But we have yet to roll that out in real rats. So that's something that I'm collaborating with Carlos Brody. He has a setup where they train many animals in the high throughput training protocol. And he's offered to allow us to take over some of these training boxes and try out some of our training methods to see if we can get animals to learn faster. So that's understanding kind of what are the realistic biological learning rules from data is something that I'm very excited about. That's a fairly new direction still in my group.
Yeah, I was talking to some experimentalists, and they were just saying that some mice just don't want to learn.
Yeah.
So I think that is
exactly. Individual variability is another aspect. Some animals, learn the task in a few days, and others take weeks to learn. And why is that? So I should say my colleague Elena Witten is also recording the dopamine system while animals learn. And so can we now not only look at variability in how quickly an animal's behavior advances, but also how that correlates with the amount of dopamine that's released on every trial? Can we see those differences? So we actually published a paper collaboratively just last year saying that I think the main result there was that you could see on day one, when you present the visual stimulus, how much dopamine is there. And if there's a lot of dopamine on those first trials, the animal's going to learn quickly. And if there's not, the animal's going to learn slowly. So that's a paper led by her postdoc Alex Pond, which I'm very proud of. It was a collaboration with Alana Witten and Nathaniel Daw, who's a reinforcement learning expert. So that's been really fun to think about, both kind of modeling behavior, but also having access to what's going on inside the brain while learning is taking place.
Yeah, I cannot help but think about how that would, translate into humans and the way humans learn, and then what is happening to the human nervous system.
It is fun to think about. I play the piano, or I like to play tennis, and you think about how do you try to improve at something. You're trying to make your fingers move a little bit faster or more accurately, and if we had more insight into what are the learning mechanisms that allow us to master a new branch of mathematics. Can we understand how the brain is able to do that, and can we help ourselves learn to learn faster? I think it's something we'd all be excited about.
That's amazing. So I've been hearing a lot of the strategies and training and stuff that are applicable. Some came from machine learning sides, and some came from neuroscience, and then to machine learning. For example, latent variable representation is big in machine learning these days, and reinforcement learning, especially for like new LLMs and stuff. It's big these days. So I would like to know how you were thinking about neuro to AI to neuro, and how far away is these days machine learning models away from the actual how brain works, and what do you think in the next 5 to 10 years? Do you think people are going to advance in closer to neuroscience, or do you think they're separate entities and they should be trained in slightly different ways? If you have any thoughts on that.
That's a great question. This is kind of a hot button debate. I think within I don't think machine learners even within machine learning, I think there's a debate about whether will understanding the brain help us design better AI? And I don't know that I have a good answer to that one. I'll say in the other direction that certainly AI, machine learning has certainly strongly influenced how we study the brain. So I think if you look, a generation ago, people were mostly studying the visual system with artificial stimuli. So we would show little spots of light or black and white checkerboards or bars or gratings, and trying to use those to build a bottom-up model of how does the brain take a bunch of individual line segments or dots and combine them into an image of a face. And so we thought we would cook up such a theory would emerge from studying the brain. And instead what happened is we got good machine learning algorithms that could recognize faces. So that just trained end-to-end, recognize objects or recognize faces. So we have VGG or AlexNet. And so suddenly those models were pure machine learning innovation, right? Just give it stacks of data, pump in a bunch of images and a bunch of labels, train the model end-to-end to label those images. And then people found I could take so that's some deep network that transforms the pixel representation of an image into some intermediate representations that we don't really understand, and then finally ends up at the final level with that's a house, that's an elephant, that's an airplane, labels of what kind of object was in those images. And I think we still don't really understand how those deep networks work. However, what people found, this is people like Jim DiCarlo and Dan Yamans, and a large number of people have it's a very popular, maybe the approach now in visual neuroscience, take those intermediate layers of the deep network that was trained purely in a machine learning setting and solve now just a linear regression problem to see the neurons that we recorded in a monkey's brain or a human's brain, can we predict their activity from these intermediate representations of a deep network? And that's by now the winning way. So I should say, no hand-designed models of combining edges or dots that we cooked up purely within neuroscience, the computational neuroscience literature, can predict neural data nearly as well as these models that started with a deep rep. So in other words, what this says is that the representations that deep networks, pure AI systems extract from the world look something like the kinds of representations that the brain is also using. Now, they're not one-to-one. We can't find one neuron in the deep network that maps onto one neuron in the brain. And this is something people argue about. So some people would still say, well, therefore it must be very different because we don't have any single neuron that looks even like any single neuron that we've recorded in the brain. You have to mix and match. You have to linearly combine a bunch of these artificial neurons to predict what one neuron in the brain would do. But anyway, I think that's been a rapid path of advancement. And similarly in auditory cortex, so my colleague Uri Hassan has passed people reading stories into a deep, I think it started off with ChatGPT 2, which was small enough that he could download it in his lab. And they would take audio, or they would take text, put it into a large language model, and then find that the latent variables extracted by the latent variable model could predict activity in fMRI signals in human auditory cortex. So in other words, our ability to predict how the brain encodes speech is to use as an intermediary a ChatGPT. So an artificial model was able to extract something that then is linearly related to what the brain is doing. I think that's pretty cool. That sort of says that if you train an AI to process images or process speech or process language, the kinds of things that it needs to do end up being useful for understanding how the brain works. And so I think the big debate now is, does it go the other way? So there is some debate about how close are these LLMs, how close is AI to really being artificial general intelligence? And some people say we're already there, they're already intelligent. And others feel that they're still a long ways from being intelligent. I don't have a dog in that fight. I guess I may be more of an AI skeptic than an AI true believer, but I think people, Gary Marcus is one prominent critic, and I think Jan LeCun has also made some comments about we need new paradigms to make AIs that are genuinely intelligent. We'll need more than next word prediction. So the current crop of LLMs are mostly predicting the next word or next token, and then their reinforcement learning with human feedback is how they're tuned up to give answers that we like more than what they would have just for next token prediction. So is that enough to achieve intelligence, or do we need something else that the brain? So to what degree is that what the brain does? I think people argued a bit about that. Do they have no maybe internal model of the physics of the world? So I think one theory is that we need to, humans are born with sort of intuitive physics. So Josh Tenenbaum at MIT has done a lot of work along these lines. How can we understand human intelligence is very flexible. We don't need, he has these cool experiments where you show a stack of blocks and you ask them to predict whether it will fall over or not. Well, how did they learn that? They didn't study millions of movies of blocks falling over. They have some model of how physics works, and they can kind of, by looking at a tower, determine how stable is that tower. If I bump the table, how likely is it to tumble over or not? And I can do that by simulating the world in my mind, and that's something that we don't think maybe LLMs have. And so, so it's an open question, I think, as to whether we need new understanding of how the brain works and use that to design the next generation of AIs. Tony Zader at Cold Spring Harbor, someone else who I think is in that camp, that the brain has something special about its architecture or the kinds of computations it's performing, and we'll need to understand those in order to design new AI. I think that would be exciting if that were true, but I don't really know.
I don't know. I mean, I am still, happy that people are able to figure out when something is written by AI. I feel like we are like that is like the next level of learning, because when ChatGPT came out, everybody was so amazed how well it writes your essays, writes your emails, etc. But now we have developed this ability to detect when something is machine made. So I think that is like a uniquely human trait, maybe that maybe it cannot be replicated or will be in the future. I don't know.
It's an interesting point. I mean, I think it's a bit of an arms race, right? I mean, it's getting harder and harder to tell maybe whether, I think this is an important question for society, right? Being able, we're seeing the proliferation of, AI slop or things that people aren't sure if they're real or AI. And so that I think is a frightening, as a professor, our students were reading essays, are they written by the student or written by AI is something, of course, that we want to be able to know. And I think it's getting harder maybe to know. And when we think about education, I think we're also, I don't think we yet have a good view of how to use these tools to expand human potential rather than to limit it. So in other words, if we use AI as a crutch and we never learn to write, you've lost some critical part of your ability to think. I mean, I think one view is that being able to write well is closely linked to the ability to think well. If we outsource all of our writing to AI, we won't also be able to think rigorously. So I have kids who are one is in middle school, one is in high school, and I think at their level, so maybe there was a similar thing when calculators first came out. So maybe we don't need to learn long division anymore, long multiplication. Calculators can do that. Our kids don't need to know this. But that's absolutely not what happened with math education. It was decided that our children do need to learn long division. So on my kids' math exams, there's a part of the test where you can use calculators and then a part where you can't. And so there's different sets of skills. And so I think maybe at some point we'll have a better sense of like which things should you use AI for and which things shouldn't you. And I don't think we've reached that point yet of knowing like how do we use this as something to augment human intelligence rather than to replace it, or something that makes it harder for our students to learn rather than easier for them to learn. But I think as a professor, it's a slightly scary proposition that we're having to radically rethink our teaching methods in light of this ability of AI to do the work. So I mean, I've heard stories from some of my colleagues about teaching. Our first year grad students all take a programming class. Actually, this was one for the undergrads. The undergrads in our neuroscience department also take a programming class where they're supposed to learn to program in Python. And some of the students, even after the class had ended, in their next class, they were asked to write a for loop, and they said, I don't know how to do that. And it turned out that in the previous class, they'd gotten through by just asking ChatGPT to do their homeworks for them. And then when it didn't work, they would just ask it to do it again without actually wrestling with how to actually solve the problem. So in other words, we don't want to just use the AI to do the homework for you and you don't learn anything. How do we make sure that they actually learn? Or maybe it's a question, maybe our students don't need to learn what a for loop is, and that'll be, some we don't need to learn assembly language anymore. Maybe we don't need to learn for loops. I tend to think that it's still useful to know how to program, even if you use an AI to help you programming in your day-to-day research. I don't know if you all are wrestling with this in your own labs, in your own research. How much of your code do you write yourself versus do you use?
I try to write a lot of my code, especially when I'm planning my experiment or my simulations and I'm designing the code itself. What I usually use AI for is when I need to shorten something, when I wrote it too verbosely and it's starting to get unreadable. So I, for example, hate writing, like saving things into dictionaries, and I will never learn that, and I ask every single time. So I'm trying to like navigate this trade-off of like I don't want to waste my time like half of an afternoon just like figuring out the dictionary. But on the other hand, like I also want to use my brain on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think right. And when it comes to you can accelerate science, that's great for all of us. So we can outsource the boring, repetitive parts of a project. Yeah, my own students, I think some of them use AI very heavily to help with coding, and others it'll make subtle mistakes that are hard to find, and so they'd almost rather write it themselves. So that then it would taking the AI's produced code and figuring out where the bug is takes them longer than just writing it themselves. And so I think we're in a place where it's not clear always what the best trade-off is for how to do that, but it's probably changing as we go.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me as well, I realize sometimes the bug it produces, it's gonna try and solve its own bug, and it takes you down the rabbit hole. But sometimes it's really useful, especially with VS Code AI agentic integration. Or one thing I find really useful is how it has the repository awareness. So sometimes there might be a function deep into the module of new software that I do not know. It's really quick in finding those, but sometimes it does not have the context of how the code was written. Because if the software was written by a human, there's a certain level of domain understanding that people in this domain would understand why I wrote this. And but the AI might not have that because it's never trained in that specific corpus. So I use it with caution. I do use it, but like Dora said, saving the dictionaries, or let's say I know exactly how the graph looks, but change the font size, text size, make it prettier. Exactly.
Learning all the flags and how to make something look the way you want can be very time consuming, and getting AI to do that for you can be great.
Yeah, I used to spend hours trying to beautify the pictures, but now once the data is there, I know how it looks, then the beautification can happen by AI. So those are the things. And some brainstorming and code organization is also pretty useful. So if you have to go back and give advice to your younger self in undergrad, who is trying to get into the grad school and trying to figure out research and stuff, what would you tell yourself?
Let's see. I guess one piece of advice is to look for people who are I think your choice of collaborators and choice of mentors is really a critical element of success. So you want to, science is very collaborative, as you all know. I think it's funny to think about how the public's image of a scientist is often it's someone without, like a nerd lacking social skills, like someone who sits in front of a computer all day. And it's funny, I contrast it, I have many friends who are in the humanities. The people in the humanities, you might think they're social, more well-rounded, more social creatures than scientists, but often humanities scholars go spend all day in an archive and they write their books by themselves. Science is a very social enterprise. So I think emphasizing the importance of having good social skills, getting along with people is actually as important, if not more important, than being smart. So it's not just about I think succeeding in science is, I think sometimes young scientists, and I maybe have this mentality, is you have to be the smartest person, and you have to, and it's competitive. So you also have to show how smart you are. And that's actually a recipe for failure. You really want to be, you want to be connecting with people who are, you'll work better in collaboration with others you'll achieve more than you could ever achieve by yourself. So I think, but then you also can, there are people who are, good advisors, and there are people who are toxic advisors. And so certainly ask around about people's reputation instead of, I think sometimes it takes a while. You think you meet someone and you have a good first impression. First impressions are not all that reliable. I guess I found that both as a trainee and as a mentor. It's sometimes you initially really seem to click with someone, but then when you start working together, it doesn't actually go so well. Or vice versa, that someone seems like a really supportive and lovely person when you first meet them, but then you talk to everyone in their lab and they're all unhappy. And that's a signal that you should really pay attention to. So I think, making another aspect is, does the person finish the work that they start? So I'm someone that's not always good at that. So I think I especially try to focus on finding other people to collaborate with who are really good at kind of the last mile, finish, putting the period on. I tend to a little bit like, it's fun to start a new project. The new idea is really exciting. But then you see some problems with it. It's not quite as good as it seemed at first. Oh, I'll drop that and move on to something else. If you keep doing that, you'll end up with a bunch of projects that are halfway finished and half-baked, and you won't have any publication. So finishing really matters in science. And so I think for me, so I think my advice to myself would be, try not to do that quite so much. Go ahead and finish, before you have that next idea, before you move on to the next thing. And then for me, I think it's useful to make sure that I don't link up with someone else who's too much like me in this tendency to not finish things. So I've been really fortunate that some of the students I've had have been really just amazing, really creative, but they're all, and good at coming up with new ideas, but also great at, okay, so we're here, let's go ahead and finish the paper. This is what we need to do, get it done, and get it published before moving on to the next project. So I would just say, it's great to get research experience as an undergraduate. It's not super important that you publish. I didn't have a publication when I was an undergraduate, but I think increasingly grad school is very competitive. So if you can go the last mile to finish something and get it published, even if it's not in a prestigious journal, I think it's worthwhile to finish that and try to get a publication. I guess would be one piece of advice. But then also link up with other people who have that ability is a second piece of advice. And then third is just be a decent person, be generous with credit. You're going to get more by, even if you let someone else be the first author on this paper, and you're second author, you're going to go much further in life than if you have a nasty fight with them over who gets to, you never collaborate with this person again. Let them be first author, and next time they'll let you be first author, and you're going to have a career of working together instead of taking the small-minded view that it's a zero-sum game and that I have to absolutely get them all the credit that I deserve. So I think the people that I've been really fortunate, the advisors I've worked for have been people who wanted what was best for me as their trainee, and were more cared about the discovery and the idea, not so much about claiming credit. And so thinking about building personal relationships, I think, is really important. When it comes to faculty hiring, I probably should have said this in the podcast, but we aren't just trying to hire the smartest scientists or the scientists with the most papers or the most grants. You're also hiring a colleague. This is someone's going to be down in hall. This is someone you want to get coffee with. This is someone you want to have lunch with. This is someone you want to co-advise a student with.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for demystifying the scientific path. Like, it's very much true in our experience as well. It's very much social, very much collaborative, and especially at BU, we have fun all the time. There's a lot of socials and stuff.
So one concrete piece of advice is before you join a lab, talk to the other people in the lab without the advisor present. Just say, what? A good way to frame the question is, what kind of people do well in this lab? Mm-hmm. That's maybe a less, not is this a good, you might also ask, are people happy in this lab? But I think, sometimes you'll hear, well, the kind of person who does well in this lab is someone with a very tough skin who can handle lots of harsh criticism. That might be a sign to you that, but anyway, and I also, for people, coming to join my lab, I'll encourage them, talk to my trainees when I'm not around. I hope they'll say good things, but maybe they'll have some advice about why this would be a good fit or wouldn't be a good fit to someone. So absolutely seek out other trainees before you join a lab to figure out what's the vibe really like.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it is completely normal to connect with fellow trainees, and in that sense, that is something that I had to learn when I came here, because there was not a lot of cross, talk between students where I did my previous education. So just learning to talk to your cohort, and our department has been really good about establishing these connections within the cohort as well. We have a very close-knit group of people that you can talk about science with, but also just commiserate when it comes to just general PhD stuff.
Yeah, having a nice culture is really important. So
Okay, so to wrap up, because science does get intense, we were wondering, is there any type of hobby that you do to unwind, or is there any quirky hobby that you had during your graduate years?
That may be a leading question there. I mean, now I run and I play soccer. So I play soccer once or twice a week. And I was coaching when my kids were younger. I used to coach soccer as well, so that took up a lot of my time. And then I was a runner. I ran track in college and cross country, and so I still like to run. I'm just watching myself slowly get a little bit slower every year, but it's still fun. I joined a running group recently that works out of the track. So that's I think that's a good way to having some kind of physical activity is important. And I do play piano, so once in a while I do that, not as often as I would like. When we go to quirky, I don't think it's quirky, but I love to dance. And when I was in grad school, I did some b-boying, breakdancing. So I met a guy who taught a breakdancing class at a dance studio, and I was like, I grew up in the 80s, and sort of when Michael Jackson was first doing the moonwalk, and that was something that when I was in elementary school, we would bring cardboard to the playground and learn to do backspins and stuff like that. So I'd had sort of this early exposure to breakdancing, but had never really done it that much. But so in grad school, actually, two of the other grad students and I all signed up together. And so people used to give us a hard time where you go to the subway and put out a hat and try to raise money. We never got to the level where we were ready to perform for an audience. But so I will now occasionally break dance at a wedding, but I don't get the chance to do that very often. But I do like to dance when there's an opportunity to do so. But
that sounds awesome.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of dancers in neuroscience. So if you look around, there are a lot of people who did dance earlier in their career, and so that's one. And neuroscientists tend to have good parties. So if you've been to meetings, there's often is a good dance party sometime. Maybe not at the smaller computational meetings, but at larger meetings. Yeah. There often is a good party with music and things. So. Yeah.
And BU is very good about, we do have some classes that we can take as a graduate student. You can sign on to dance classes. Great. This semester I signed up for fencing. So that was something new that I'd never tried before. So that is also just a really nice way to, just experience new things.
Well, it's important to have work-life balance, right? You have to have, you can't work all the time, and to have, it's another way to have social avenues that don't have people outside of your scientific arena that give you some additional perspectives.
Yes, for sure.
I also took ballroom dancing, cha-cha, and foxtrot this semester.
That's awesome.
Yeah, and we both did a half marathon as well. So running
Nice,
keeps.
yeah.
Boston is a big running culture. So even if you're like just thinking about it, it just gets you somehow.
Yeah.
Well, you got the marathon, so I don't know if your next step is the Boston Marathon. So my brother ran it a few years ago. I've done New York Marathon, but never Boston.
They run too fast. Even the Cambridge half. Oh my God, they were fast.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was more for the community. For me, we had a little group chat with all of the people working in this building, and we would go on our runs like after work together. So that was definitely really.
We had a building run club.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay. So very, very last question. What's next for you? You mentioned that, previously, not on this podcast, that you are taking a sabbatical this semester. You have been working on some new things, but what are your general plans for the next year or so?
I don't know. I guess there's so many exciting things mostly they're kind of extensions of what we're doing right now. I guess I'd like to think more about how can we take architecture constraints from the Connectome to build better deep learning models of vision? That's maybe one direction. And I'm really excited about trying out, methods for training animals that are informed by reinforcement learning. So that's another, understanding how learning takes place. And there are a lot of variables we haven't really manipulated yet, like the amount of reward. We know that humans, gambling is very reinforcing. It's much better if you get unpredictable reward. You're much more likely to keep playing than if every time I push a lever, I get a reward. It's less rewarding than if once in a while I get a big reward. So that's something we don't really exploit when it comes to training animals, or the timing of rewards. So I think there's a lot of knobs that we haven't started playing with when it comes to how to understand behavior and how it's shaped by the spatial temporal context of reward that we put animals and humans in. I guess my dream would be to use this to start a company to help people learn a skill faster. So that would be my my long-term goal. Can we take what we've learned about the brain and how we learn to help people learn skills faster? I know that's something that I do wonder. Already there's a lot of online learning platforms. You have Duolingo for learning languages. I've spent some time with Duolingo, and it seems like they repeat too much to me. But maybe what I don't know is whether they're using. Presumably they've studied how much repetition is needed in order to advance your language learning at the right rate. Unclear. Or Khan Academy also has online. There are reams of data there that they're surely exploiting, I would imagine, although I don't know too much about how they're doing it, to try to figure out, can we teach people things faster? And so I would love at some point to kind of connect with human learning platforms to think about how, I think we all are excited about learning. That's one of the things that got us into academia. There's so much math that I wish I understood, but I don't. And it's, I have a pile of papers I want to read and books that I haven't read. And so if there were a way to kind of learn more of it and retain and also remember it, it's something I would love to learn how to do.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for joining us today in our podcast. We had amazing talk. The song is also enjoying over there. And so much insights for our audience. I learned a lot, so I'm hoping that our audience would also learn a lot. There's so many insights that we had never covered in our previous podcast, and advice to the students as well. It's very different angle of advice than what we have been hearing in the podcast. So definitely you love this, and thank you so much. We're excited for the seminar and talks, and we hope you enjoy your time in Boston and BU for whatever time you have remaining in Boston as well.
Yeah, thank you,
Thank you for
Dan.
having me. That was really fun chatting with you both, and I look forward to continuing the conversation later. Bye. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. If you like this episode and want more like it, please take a moment to share it with anyone you think would enjoy it too. If you are listening on Spotify, please check out our YouTube version of the episode for some bloopers and outtakes. If you are watching on YouTube, these will follow shortly after the following message. This episode was made possible by the support of Boston University's Neurophotonics Center and listeners like you. Thank you.
Oh yeah, this is the coldest place I've ever been. I did go to Montreal once, and we landed. I remember the pilot said it's 0 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't think he made a mistake. He doesn't know it's centigrade. If he meant 0 degrees centigrade, there's no way. 0 degrees Fahrenheit is not a thing. Like that. Right. That's not a temperature that you could achieve on Earth. And sure enough, it was 0 degrees Fahrenheit. I was like, I don't even know my brain doesn't go down there. But yeah, that was eye-opening. So
yeah, sounds good.
Don't mess up.
I mean, you're the editor. You got this.
We're gonna go into like some light, like what is it called?
Fun
Advice.
question.
Yeah, advice for PhD students and like fun questions, and then we're gonna wrap up soon.
Okay, because all the questions so far were fun.
We were torturing you.
It's been horrible. I hope you weren't suffering as much as I was. Yeah.
Maybe we do want to take this off, huh? Not,
So you're getting sponsorship.
not giving free prom.
There is written on this side as well.
Oh.
So sip it from the Boston side.
Listen, mine is taped down with my name.
Oh. No, we don't actually care that much. It was just a
No,
joke.
it's fine. Nobody's sponsoring us. Or actually, the Neurophotonics Center.
Okay. So I spent a summer at an RU when I was an undergrad. There's a math RU in Upper Peninsula, Michigan, which is settled by Finns. So all the street names are in Finnish and in English, and every house has a sauna.
Yeah.
And so we were there in the summer, so we didn't have snow. But I think in the winter you'll go out of the sauna and roll in the snow. We went and jumped in Lake Superior. We were like 1 block from there, and that's like crazy cold. So it was surreal though, yeah, because you're so hot and you jump into that cold, and it is like kind of a holy experience almost. You feel like divine after. And so it really is. It isn't just about. It's also about, is this a nice person that I'm picking a colleague that I'm gonna interact with for maybe 30, 40 years.
Who else gets to pick a colleague?
Yeah, exactly.
Wow, yeah, I mean, that is crazy. I mean,
and similarly for grad student, right? You don't want, they may be brilliant, but if they're an, you know, that person is gonna, one bad apple can actually poison the whole lab culture. I've been really lucky that I haven't had that happen in my lab.
I made it look like in the bloopers of the last episode that just came out yesterday, he did a snap to do the synchronization, but one, it wasn't on camera, which doesn't help. But two, afterwards, I was like, you didn't need to do that. So it makes it look like you just snapped at something. And I was like, you didn't need to do that.
Yeah.
oh my God, you're making me look bad.
But yeah, I grew up, we hit like 120 I think 121 was the all-time high in Phoenix.
I was gonna say, you're gonna be on the other end of the spectrum,
Yeah.
right? Did you ever try baking an egg on the
Never
asphalt?
did. I think the newscasters would do that in the middle of summer.
Oh, okay.
Probably dashboard of your car would be another one where, you could really.
I mean, in this economy, I feel like I wouldn't waste an egg on the sidewalk.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you could save on gas if you cook it.
Oh, fair.
Yeah, I experienced 120 when I went to visit the Death Valley.
Oh, you did?
And
Nice.
we were there like in July,
Okay.
and at some point
It's crazy, right? Yeah.
Yes, and we were doing it in the middle of the day, and we were like, okay, haha, this is fun. We would go out of the car, take pictures, whatnot. At some point, it got so hot, our shoes started melting, and we would not turn off the car. We would run outside, take the pictures, run into the car. We're not even enjoying it anymore at that point.
It is like the feeling when you open the oven,
Yes.
and then you feel that like.
Yes, my eyes were burning. I'm like, wow, I cannot blink enough. We got you for 40 more minutes.
Okay. I didn't know if you wanted me to be more succinct or.
Oh, no, perfect. No, you're doing very well.
The
More content, the better for him to.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can slice it together to make it sound like I said something intelligent.
One question from each section. How about
Sure.
that?
Only the best question from each section.
Oh, absolutely.
You're not the worst.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready. You just
Right, I forgot we need to introduce ourselves as well.
Oh, yeah. They know us.
The two people who are listening.
Yeah, two audiences.
And legions of followers.
Listen, I'm sure
welcome
they're
to the podcast. You know us.
you know us.
You know
we
us.
told
You
you
may
our
like
life
us.
story. You might
for
not.
the first episode.
Perfect.
That was cheesy. Can I do another one that's like so cheesy?
Sure.
Okay, yeah.
I think he's gonna put that in the
Okay.
blooper. Hi, welcome to. Wait, what episode is this?
This is 3 of season 2.
Hi, welcome to episode 3 of season 2 in your.
It's okay. It's okay. You got this.
All right.
Third time's the charm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi, welcome to Neurophotonics. All right.
Third time was not the charm.
Second time was.
We're usually much better at this. Okay.
It's all right. I put you off your game. Yeah.
Are we ready to go? Well, I thought you were going to take over the next question.
No. I do the last question. It's
Okay.
fine. Cut.
Cool
Cut.
story.
Now, why would you do
It's
that?
still really wrong.